At the Crystal Al Noor Hotel, a billion-dollar negotiation between Britain and an Arab sheik was falling into chaos. The billionaire rose in fury, shouted in Arabic, and turned to leave. No one understood him, only sensing that he had just insulted the entire room. Can you imagine the tension? A deal worth billions, slipping away in seconds. Just then, a maid mopping nearby lifted her head and calmly responded in fluent Arabic. The hall froze. The billionaire stopped, mid-stride, slowly turned and looked at her as if he had heard a voice from the royal court. Her name was Madison Carter, 26 years old, with long black hair tied back in a neat ponytail. Her hotel uniform crisp but plain, no hint of makeup on her face. Her eyes were sharp, though steady in a way that made you look twice. She wasn't loud or flashy, didn't carry herself like someone begging for attention. But when she spoke, her voice carried a quiet weight, like she knew exactly what she was doing. The room, packed with suits and egos, didn't know what to make of her. The British team, led by a guy named Simon, who wore a tailored jacket and a smug grin, was already sweating. The interpreter, a nervous man with glasses sliding down his nose, had botched a key phrase, turning financial guarantee into upfront payment. That's what set Sheikh Said Al Fulan off. He was an energy tycoon dressed in a white thobe that looked like it cost more than the table he just slammed. His gold-rimmed sunglasses caught the chandelier light as he barked, so the British, think we're cheap street vendors now? Nobody caught the full meaning. Simon stammered. I'm terribly sorry, Your Excellency. That's not. But Zaid was already halfway to the door, his assistant scrambling behind him. The air felt heavy, like the deal was slipping through everyone's fingers. Hold on. Could a single moment change everything? Stay with Threadtails to find out? Madison, still holding her mop, set it against the wall. She took a step forward, bowed slightly, and said in flawless Arabic, Forgive them, Your Excellency. That's not what they meant. They intended to assure fair partnership. Her Gulf dialect was perfect, the kind of accent you don't just pick up from a textbook. The room went dead quiet. Zaid stopped, his hand on the doorframe, and turned back, his eyes locked on her, sharp as a hawk's. You speak my language? He asked, his voice low, testing. She bowed again, just a touch, and answered, I lived in Oman for 8 years. The silence stretched. Simon's mouth hung open, his pen frozen mid-air. The interpreter adjusted his glasses, looking like he'd just been slapped. Zaid's face didn't soften, but he tilted his head, studying her. Madison didn't flinch, didn't fidget. She just stood there, hands clasped in front of her, her gaze steady. It was the kind of moment where you could feel the whole room, recalculating like they'd missed something big. Nobody expected a housekeeper to step into a billion-dollar deal, let alone hold it together with a single sentence. As Madison stood there, a woman from the British team, Claire, with a sleek bob and a designer scarf, nodded, just so, leaned toward her colleague, and whispered loud enough to carry, Who let the cleaning lady in here? Does she think she's part of this? Her laugh was sharp, like glass breaking, and a few others snickered. Madison's fingers tightened briefly on her apron, but her face stayed calm. She didn't turn, didn't acknowledge the jab. Instead, she adjusted her stance, her shoulders squaring just enough to show she'd heard. Claire's colleague, a man with a flashy watch and a smirk, added, Maybe she's here to mop up our mistakes. The laughter spread, low and cruel, like a wave rolling through the room. Madison's eyes flicked to the side, just for a moment, catching Claire's gaze. Intent matters, she said softly in Arabic, her voice barely above a whisper. Claire froze, her smirk fading, unsure if she'd been addressed or not. If this moment hits you, grab your phone, hit that like button, leave a comment below, subscribe to Threadtails. It means the world to keep sharing stories like this stories. They remind us who we are when the world looks away, all right? Let's keep going. The hotel manager, a wiry guy named Paul, with slick back hair and a tie that screamed self-importance, burst into the room. His face was pale, his jaw tight. He marched straight to Madison, grabbing her arm like she was a kid caught stealing. What are you doing? He hissed, loud enough for everyone to hear. You have no right to interfere in this negotiation. His voice was sharp, cutting through the tension like a knife. Madison didn't pull away, didn't argue. She just looked at him, her face calm, and gave a small nod. Paul kept going, his finger jabbing the air. "You're a housekeeper, Madison. You clean floors. You don't belong here." The British team shifted uncomfortably, some looking at their shoes, others pretending to check their phones. Zaid watched, his expression unreadable, arms crossed. Madison bowed slightly to Paul, her hands still clasped, and walked toward the door, her steps slow and deliberate. The mop stayed propped against the wall like a quiet witness to what just happened. As she reached the doorway, a young assistant from Zaid's team, a man with a neatly trimmed beard and a nervous habit of checking his watch, stepped forward. He cleared his throat, his voice low, and said in Arabic, "You're leaving already? The room's not clean yet." His tone was mocking, and a few others chuckled, their eyes darting to Madison's back. She paused, just for a second, her hand resting on the doorframe. Without turning, she replied in Arabic, her voice steady. "Even cleanliness starts with respect." The assistant's smile vanished, his watch-checking forgotten. Zaid's lips twitched, almost a smile, but he said nothing. The room felt heavier, the laughter replaced by an awkward silence as Madison walked out, her steps echoing faintly in the hall. Nobody spoke as she left. The room felt colder, the air thicker, with unspoken judgment. Paul straightened his tie, muttering something about standards to Simon, who nodded like he agreed, but kept glancing at the door. Zaid still hadn't moved. His assistants, two men in dark suits who looked like they'd never smiled in there. Lives whispered to each other, their eyes darting between their boss and the empty doorway. The interpreter cleared his throat, trying to restart the conversation, but his voice cracked and nobody listened. The deal was still hanging by a thread, and everyone knew it. Outside in the hallway, Madison leaned against the wall for a moment. Her fingers brushed the edge of her notebook, tucked into her apron pocket. She took a slow breath, then kept walking, her shoes silent on the polished marble. As Madison moved through the hotel service corridor, a group of kitchen staff, their aprons stained with grease, spotted her. One of them, a burly chef with a loud voice and a habit of waving his ladle, called out, "Hey, it's the maid who thinks she's a big shot now." His laugh boomed, echoing off the tiled walls. The others joined in, their voices sharp, teasing. "What's next? You gonna run the hotel?" Another said, tossing a dish rag in her direction. It landed at her feet, crumpled and damp. Madison stopped, her hand resting lightly on her bag. She bent down, picked up the rag and folded it neatly, setting it on a nearby cart. "Work doesn't need a title," she said, her voice soft but clear, her eyes meeting the chef's. His laugh faltered, his ladle lowering as the others went quiet, their smirks fading. Madison turned and continued down the corridor, her steps steady, leaving the silence behind her. In the lobby, a group of hotel guests, dressed in expensive suits and dripping with jewelry, noticed Madison as she passed. One woman, with a fur stole and a voice that carried, said loudly, "Is that the maid who thought she could play diplomat?" Her friends laughed, their glasses clinking as they sipped champagne. Madison's steps slowed, but she didn't turn. She adjusted her bag, her fingers deliberate, and kept walking. The woman's friend, a man with a loud tie and a louder laugh, called after her, "Stick to the mop, sweetheart." Madison stopped, just for a moment, and glanced back. Her eyes met his, calm but piercing. "A mop cleans floors," she said quietly. "What cleans arrogance?"
Act.
The man's laugh died, his glass frozen halfway to his mouth. The group fell silent, their eyes darting away as Madison turned and walked through the revolving doors. Back in the room, the mood was sour. Simon tried to smooth things over, offering Zaid a weak smile and a new set of papers. "Your Excellency, if we could just clarify." But Zaid raised a hand, cutting him off. His voice was low, deliberate. "Let her sit," he said, his eyes still on the door. The room froze again. Simon blinked, confused. Paul, who'd been hovering near the back, stepped forward, his face twisting. "Sir, she's just—" Zaid's gaze shifted to him, and Paul stopped mid-sentence, his mouth snapping shut. "Let her sit," Zaid repeated, slower this time. "She will translate." Nobody moved for a second. like they were waiting for a punchline. Then one of Zaid's assistants pulled out a chair, the scrape of wood against the floor echoing in the silence. Madison was called back in, her face still calm, and sat down. She opened her notebook, her pen steady, and started translating. Every word was crisp, every phrase exact. The sheik gave a small nod, his lips pressed tight, saying nothing. During a break, Claire, the woman with the designer scarf, approached. Madison, her smile tight and insincere.
Ow!
"You must feel so special," she said, her voice dripping with honeyed venom, stepping in like that. "But let's be honest, you're out of your depth, aren't you?" She tilted her head, waiting for a reaction. Madison set her pen down, her movements slow, deliberate. She looked at Claire, her eyes steady, and said, "Depth isn't measured by titles." Claire's smile faltered, her fingers tightening on her scarf. The other British team members glanced over, their conversations pausing. Madison picked up her pen again, her focus returning to her notebook as if Claire's words were just background noise. The room resumed its hum, but Claire stood there, her face flushed, her confidence cracked. The negotiation moved forward, smoother now, the tension easing with every sentence Madison translated. She didn't just repeat words. Nuances, the unspoken agreements, the weight behind Zaid's clipped responses. Simon kept stealing glances at her, his frown deepening, like he couldn't figure out how she fit into this. One of his team members, a woman with perfectly styled hair and a pearl necklace, leaned over and whispered, "Who is she really?"
Simon just shook his head.
When the meeting ended, Zaid stood, gave Madison a long look, and left without a word. The British team packed up, muttering about deadlines and flights. Paul, though, wasn't done. He waited in the lobby, his arms crossed, his face red. When Madison walked by, he stepped in front of her. "Who do you think you are?" he snapped. "A floor cleaner playing translator? You've shamed this hotel?" Madison didn't answer. She reached into her pocket, pulled off her name tag, and set it on the counter with a soft click. The sound felt final, like a door closing. She bowed, slightly, just as she had in the meeting, and walked away, her notebook still in her hand. A couple of guests in the lobby glanced over, their eyes soft with pity, but Madison didn't look back. She moved through the revolving doors, her steps steady, her face unreadable. Behind her, Paul was already on the phone, his voice loud as he demanded her termination. "She's done here," he said, pacing. "No one makes a fool of me like that." The concierge, a young woman with a tight bun, overheard and shook her head, her lips pursed. She'd seen Madison work late shifts, never complaining, always thorough, but she didn't say anything. Nobody did. As Madison stepped outside, a hotel valet, a young guy with a crooked smile and a habit of talking too fast, called out to her, "Hey, you're the one who spoke Arabic, right? What, you think you're some kind of hero now?" His tone was light, but the jab was there, sharp and intentional. A few other valets laughed, leaning against the parked cars. Madison paused, her bag slung over her shoulder. She turned slightly, her eyes meeting his. "Heroes don't clean floors," she said, her voice soft but clear. "But they don't mock them either." The valet's smile faded, his hands shoving into his pockets. The others went quiet, their laughter cut short. Madison turned and kept walking, the Dubai heat hitting her face as she stepped into the sunlight. That evening, a message arrived at the hotel's front desk, marked urgent and sealed with wax. It was from Sheikh Zaid's office. The concierge handed it to Paul, who opened it with a smirk, expecting an apology for the chaos. His face fell as he read it. The note was short. "Keep her. Need to speak with her privately." A pause. Hands shook as he folded the paper, his jaw tight. He didn't say a word to the staff, just stormed off to his office. Madison was called to the penthouse. She walked in, her uniform still on, expecting a lecture. Instead, she found Zaid sitting at a glass table, a small box in front of him. He gestured for her to sit. She did, her hands folded in her lap. He slid the box toward her, his face serious. Inside was a letter, sealed with the UAE's national crest. Madison opened it, her fingers careful, like she was handling something fragile. It was an invitation to join the language advisory panel at the Abu Dhabi Energy Summit. Zaid leaned back, his voice steady. "You didn't just translate," he said. "You understood intent, something most advisors lack after 10 years. In the penthouse, as Madison folded the letter, Zaid's assistant, the one with the nervous watch-checking habit, lingered by the door. He cleared his throat, his voice low and sneering. "Don't get too comfortable," he said in Arabic, his eyes narrowing. "This is a fluke. You're still just the help." Madison's fingers paused on the letter, her movement slow. She looked at him, her gaze steady, and replied in Arabic, "Help builds empires." "What do you build?" The assistant's face reddened, his hand frozen on his watch. Zaid, still seated, raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Madison stood, bowed slightly to Zaid, and walked out, the letter tucked carefully into her bag. The assistant stayed by the door, his jaw tight, his confidence unraveling. As Madison left the penthouse, the elevator doors opened to reveal a hotel event planner, a woman with a clipboard and a sharp suit, who glanced at Madison's uniform and rolled her eyes. "You're the one causing all the fuss," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "This hotel doesn't need drama from the cleaning crew." Her words echoed in the small space, loud enough for a nearby bellhop to smirk. Madison adjusted, her bag, her fingers brushing the letter inside. She looked at the planner, her eyes calm but unflinching. "Drama fades," she said softly. "Skill doesn't." The planner's clipboard slipped slightly in her grip, her lips parting as if to respond, but no words came. The bellhop's smirk vanished, and the elevator dinged as Madison stepped out. Her steps steady, the air around her quiet but heavy, with presence. Madison's first day at the Abu Dhabi Energy Summit was electric. She walked into the conference hall, her plain dress drawing stares from the polished crowd. A journalist, a woman with red lipstick and a notepad, approached her. "Before the session started, so you're the maid who got lucky," she said, her smile more of a smirk. "Care to comment on how you charmed your way here?" The question hung in the air, sharp and loaded. Madison set her notebook on the table, her movements deliberate. She looked at the journalist, her eyes calm but unflinching. Charm doesn't speak languages," she said. "Work does." The journalist's pen stopped, her smirk fading. The other reporters nearby shifted, their murmurs quieting as Madison turned to her notes, her focus unshaken. The next day, the gossip started. It wasn't kind. A group of hotel staff, led by a front desk clerk named Tara, who always wore much perfume and a fake smile, huddled in the break room. "She's not even that pretty," Tara said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Must have caught the sheik's eye." That's all it took. Another clerk, a guy with gelled hair and a loud laugh, chimed in. "Yeah, I bet she batted her lashes and got a promotion." The rumor spread like wildfire. By evening, a tabloid headline was online, a wink that changed her life at a Dubai hotel. Madison's phone buzzed with messages from old acquaintances, people she hadn't spoken to in years. "Really, Madison? That's how you got ahead?" One read. Another just said, "Lucky break?" She didn't respond. She shut down her social media, deleted the apps, and kept her head down. Her notebook stayed close, though tucked into her bag like a shield. At the hotel a week later, Tara was working the front desk when a guest, a businessman with a heavy accent and a gold watch, asked about Madison. "Is she the one who got famous?" he said, his voice loud, his grin wide. "Tell her to come clean my room next time. She's got skills." The other guests in line laughed, their voices carrying across the lobby. Tara smirked, leaning forward. "Oh, she's moved on to bigger things. It's probably too good for us now." The concierge, overhearing, gripped her pen tighter, her knuckles white. She'd worked with Madison, seen her stay late to scrub floors, never complaining. She wanted to say something, but her lips stayed shut. Madison wasn't there to hear it. She was already in Abu Dhabi, preparing for her press conference, her notebook opened, her pen moving. When Madison flew to Abu Dhabi for her first press conference, the room was packed. Porters leaned forward, cameras flashing, waiting for her to slip up. She walked to the podium, her plain black dress unremarkable, her hair still tied back. No jewelry, no makeup, just her. She opened with a passage in classical Arabic, her voice steady, weaving Hijazi proverbs with a rhythm that felt ancient. Alive. The room went quiet. A professor, an older man with a gray beard and a tweed jacket, stood up, his hands shaking as he clapped. "I never thought I'd hear this form again from an American," he said, his voice thick. Others joined. Their applause genuine. The next day's paper had a new headline. "No more doubts. She's a Gulf linguistic specialist." Zaid, reading the coverage in his office, gave a faint smile, his fingers tapping the desk. Madison was named chief interpreter for the next OPEC summit. Before the OPEC summit, Madison attended a preparatory meeting with other interpreters. One of them, a man with a crisp suit and a condescending smile, leaned back in his chair as she entered. "So, you're the housekeeper everyone's talking about," he said, his voice loud enough to turn heads. "Must be nice to skip the line." The other interpreters glanced at each other, some smirking, others looking away. Madison set her bag down, her movement slow, and opened her notebook. She looked at the man, her expression calm. "Lines don't matter," she said. "Accuracy does." He scoffed, but his confidence wavered when she began translating a complex document. Her voice steady, her pronunciation flawless. The room's attention shifted, the smirks fading as her expertise filled the space. Back in the U.S. for a short visit, Madison sat at her aunt's kitchen table, the air thick with the smell of coffee and burned toast. Her relatives, a mix of cousins and uncles who'd never left their small town, leaned back in their chairs, skeptical. "You just got lucky," her cousin Jenna said, her nails tapping the table. "Right place, right time, that's all." Her uncle nodded, his baseball cap pulled low. "Don't get cocky, Madison. It's not like you earned it." Madison just smiled, her hands wrapped around her mug. She didn't argue, didn't explain. Later, on her flight back to the UAE, she opened her notebook. Pages were filled with notes, 3 new languages she was learning, scribbled in neat rows. A young Egyptian boy in the seat across the aisle was chattering to his mother, his voice bright. Madison leaned over, said something in classical Arabic, and the boy giggled, his eyes wide. His mother's face softened, her eyes welling up as she whispered, "Thank you." On the flight, a flight attendant. A woman with a tight smile and a habit of glancing at her watch noticed Madison's notebook. "Studying on a plane?" she said, her tone sharp, like she was catching Madison doing something wrong. "You must think you're important now." The other passengers nearby turned, curious. Madison closed her notebook, her fingers steady, and looked up. "Learning never stops," she said, her voice soft but clear. The flight attendant's smile tightened, and she walked away, her heels clicking. The boy's mother, still watching, gave Madison a small nod, her eyes warm. Madison reopened her notebook, her pen moving again, as if the interruption never happened. Before the OPEC summit began, Madison was in a side room, reviewing documents. When a junior diplomat from another delegation approached her, he was young. With slick hair and a smug grin, his badge dangling proudly. "I heard about you," he said, his voice loud, drawing attention from others nearby. "The maid who stumbled into a big job. Bet you're just here for the photo ops." His laugh was sharp, meant to sting. Madison set her papers down, her movements precise, and looked at him. Her eyes were calm, but there was a weight to them. "Photos fade," she said, her voice low but clear. "Words last." The diplomat's grin faltered, his badge suddenly seeming too big for his chest. The others in the room glanced away, their conversations stalling as Madison returned to her documents, her pen moving steadily. The OPEC summit was different. Madison walked in, not as a housekeeper, not as an afterthought, but at the head of the table. Her dress was still simple, her hair still tied back, but the room shifted when she entered. The British team was there, Simon included, his smile tighter now, less smug. He stood to greet her, his handshake quick, his eyes avoiding hers. Zaid arrived last, his presence filling the space like a storm cloud. He didn't say much, just took his seat and nodded at Madison. The room watched her translate, her voice steady, her hands moving with her pen as she took notes. During a break, a reporter cornered her, his microphone too close. "How does a hotel maid rise this far?" he asked, his tone sharp, fishing for a story. Madison looked at him, her eyes calm. "I never saw that job as beneath me," she said. "Wherever language exists, there is value." The reporter blinked, his pen pausing, then scribbled it down. At the summit's closing dinner, a senior executive from the British team, a man with gray hair and a Rolex, approached Madison as she stood by the dessert table. "You've done well for yourself," he said, his voice smooth but patronizing. "But let's not pretend this isn't a fairy tale." His smile was thin, his eyes cold. Edison set her plate down, her movements deliberate. She looked at him, her gaze steady. "Fairy tales end," she said. "Work doesn't." The executive's smile froze, his hand tightening on his glass. The other guests nearby went quiet, their conversations pausing as Madison walked away. Her steps calm, her presence unshaken. After the summit, Reuters published an article. The headline was bold: "Sheikh Zayed Al Fulon declares Madison Carter is my senior advisor and the reason I'm investing $2 billion in the U.S.?" The piece quoted Zayed directly, his words blunt. "She understands what others miss. That's worth more than money." Investors took notice. Dozens requested meetings with Madison, their emails piling up in her inbox. She didn't gloat, didn't celebrate. She just kept working, her notebook always closed, her pen always moving. Back at the Crystal Al Noor, things had changed. Paul, the manager, was let go quietly. No announcement, just a new face at his desk. Tara, the clerk, found her name trending online after a guest posted about her snide comments. The sponsorship she'd bragged about for a local fashion brand, gone. Simon's team lost a major contract, their reputation bruised after word spread. About their fumble in Dubai, nobody said Madison's name in those stories, but the truth was there, heavy and undeniable. Madison didn't look back. She didn't need to. Her steps were steady now, her presence enough. The world had shifted, not because she demanded it, but because she'd never stopped being herself. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was strength. Carved out of years of being underestimated, she kept walking, her notebook in her bag, her eyes on the next summit, the next language, the next moment. The people who judged her, mocked her, dismissed her, they were still talking, still trying to explain it away. But their words didn't matter anymore. The truth did, and it was loud enough. To everyone who's ever been looked down on, who's felt the sting of being misjudged, who's carried their dignity through a room full of sneers, you weren't wrong. You weren't small. You were seen. You still are. Where are you watching? From leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with Thread Tales through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.